Thank you very much for that warm introduction. Your Royal Highness, Madam Prime Minister, and our fearless Chair, Ted Turner, and all the distinguished guests in the room. It's always wonderful to be in a city where you have so many friends. Nan and I love Norway, and we love coming here. And it's also good to be here walking around with no confusion or ambiguity as to who you are and whom you're meeting. I say this because some years ago when I stepped down as Secretary General and we took a holiday in a village in Italy, Nan and I, and we wanted to stay incognito for a while and tried to stay very quiet. After a while, we got a bit bored, and I said, let's go and get newspapers. And we walked into a shop, and within minutes, a group of about 6 men standing in the corner were looking at us, and one of them broke away and made for us. And I turned to Nan and I said, oh my God, we still have a couple of weeks to go, and we've blown our cover in the village. How are we going to manage? And the fellow by then was on top of me, and he put out his hand and said, Morgan Freeman. He said, Morgan Freeman, may I have an autograph? So I said, sure. And I signed K. Freeman. He was very happy. I was very happy. And Nan turned around to me and said, and on top of it, you are today a free man. And anyway, it's really wonderful to be here. And let me thank all of you for inviting me to participate in this session and to thank the organizers for putting it together. And I think this is a conference that can make a good contribution to our efforts to achieving the Millennium Development Goals. And I suspect you're going to have a very lively and substantive discussion over the next day or two. And honestly, I cannot imagine a better and more fitting place for this conversation than Norway. Norway, which has demonstrated strong and continuous support and involvement in driving forward progress towards the Millennium Development Goals and doing whatever it can to help uplift the poor around the world. This conference, in my judgment, is also a further proof of Norway's determination to continue to find new ways to afford the poorest and the most vulnerable with the opportunity to lead better lives. And in relation to Africa, there is no better time to bring leaders from business, government, civil society, and other innovative partners together to discuss the future of Africa. The huge opportunity and vast potential that currently exists in Africa has created a new sense of optimism. People are seeing the continent as a continent of opportunity, and the narrative around Africa's development has changed. More than ever before, companies, countries are increasingly focused not on the continent's problems, but its endless possibilities, and there is a good reason for this optimism. In the past few years, we have seen significant political developments, freer elections, fairer and better attempts by governments to improve governance, improve macroeconomic policies, and basically democratic governance is improving. Compared to other regions, Africa has weathered, I believe, the recent financial crisis quite well. In fact, IMF predicts that 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies over the next 5 to 10 years will be in Africa. And the countries they have targeted are Ethiopia, Mozambique, Tanzania, Congo, Ghana, Zambia, and Nigeria. And of course, the OECD is also anticipating that Africa will be the second fastest growing region this year. So this is some of the good news concerning the continent. Africa has also made some progress towards achieving the MDGs with better policies in place and with the support of an increasingly engaged civil society, the growth of the private sector, and openness to investments. These factors have combined to accelerate a change in perception, and more, it is obvious that Africa has the capacity to shoulder the responsibility for its own progress and development. There are, of course, many obstacles still to be overcome and areas where we are falling behind. And there is no doubt that we need to focus attention in ending the conflicts which has given the continent such a bad name. If we can resolve these conflict areas, we can then focus on the essential work of economic and social development. So despite the advances in social and economic development, we need to ensure also that the economic growth is inclusive and the benefits are shared and translated into better lives for the population, particularly those in the rural areas. And while the increasingly young and dynamic population has the potential to change the continent, it also poses a difficult task in terms of providing adequate education, health services, skills, and gainful employment. There's also a pressing need to address the shortfalls in energy, infrastructure, and worryingly in food security, food and nutrition security. In fact, most economists will tell you that the two biggest constraints, or if you wish, blocks on African development is infrastructure and energy. If you're a manufacturer and you have 90 days or 100 days of outages, how do you retain your market share? How do you assure your customers that you will deliver and deliver on time? And so this is an area where Africa has a lot to do, and I think there's lots of focus being placed on infrastructure and energy. And of course, the infrastructure also means if we are able to link up the African countries by road, by rail, we can increase trade amongst ourselves substantively. Today, only about 10% of African trade is intra-African. We deal more with outside regions than with ourselves. And if we can increase intra-African trade, we can boost trade amongst ourselves between $250 to $300 billion in a relatively short period. And of course, we also see a situation where Africa is marginalized in international affairs and decisions. It is often a subject of international debate, but that debate hardly includes Africans as participants. They talk about us, but we are not there to speak for ourselves. And I hope over time, the international system will be reformed in such a way that Africa will gain a voice. And I think the aftershocks of the last economic crisis also makes it clear that the reforms that we require, we often hear of the Security Council, is also required at the international financial institutions. And over this period, I think I can say that there has been ample evidence that with the right combination of leadership, international support, focused development programs, the huge potential of Africa can be turned into enormous gains and advances. However, many countries still face many challenges in mobilizing necessary resources to get the job done. Governments in today's climate, and here I'm referring to donor governments, have problems releasing money. They have problems explaining to their constituents and voters why they should go and spend money in distant countries when they have problems at home. Norway, of course, is an exception, and you've really decided and have maintained your support for international development efforts. But in many countries, it's an uphill battle. So if we are going to achieve all the goals we set ourselves, we need to be creative and find ways of creating partnerships. It is only by pooling our efforts and resources that collectively we can tackle some of the challenges that we face. I think it is crucial that the private sector, civil society, and governments work together in improving the conditions of the poor and achieving the MDGs. And so the idea of cross-sector collaboration has taken hold. It's not new, but today it's generally accepted. I recall when I started raising this issue at the UN, and luckily Ted Turner came in and made that big gift of $1 billion. At that time, we were still debating opening the doors to private sector. We worked a bit better with civil society, but there was still some hesitation. And in fact, some ambassadors were asking the question, who gave the Secretary General the authority or the mandate to open the door to private sector and so widely also to the civil society. And yet there were things that we could not have done without the support of the civil society. The landmine ban, which was signed in Canada, we could not have done it without their support. The establishment of the International Criminal Court, we could not have done it without them. And of course, when they posed the question, I said, well, the answer is in the Charter. The Charter begins in its opening paragraph with "we, the peoples of the world." The peoples were outside the glass house in New York. They were not in the UN headquarters. So we had to reach out to them if we were going to be faithful to our own charter. So in fact, when Ted made his extraordinary gift, I thought that will settle the debate. But some ambassadors were asking me, how do we know he's not going to interfere with our decisions? He may want to take part in Security Council General Assembly decisions. I said, no, first of all, we have no procedure for that, and it's not Ted's intention. He's somebody who believes in the UN, who believes in what we are doing, who wants to make a contribution to the world. And eventually, this is what happened. But today, I'm so happy to see that not only have we embraced a partnership and accepted that we all need to work together to make this world a better place, but more and more companies are joining the fray. The UN is reaching out more and more. And there are wonderful examples of partnerships which have confirmed the belief and the trust we placed in that relationship. For example, if it hadn't been for private-public collaboration, we wouldn't have the Gavi on the vaccine, which has so much to deal with Gates Foundation and others creating a fund that has invested so much in finding the right vaccines to help the sick, the poor, and the weak. If it hadn't been for that partnership, we couldn't have established the Global Fund, which has raised billions to fight HIV/AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. And today we have over 3 million people receiving treatment with HIV/AIDS. And I think what we are seeing in Africa today, in our attempts to improve health, to improve education, to help small-scale farmers, is that technology is playing a very important role. I'm today engaged with what we call the Alliance for Green Revolution. Our effort is to work with African farmers and governments to assure their own food security. Food and nutrition security is essential, and today it's also a global problem. Food prices are rising, and it is going to continue to rise. So if we can help them to move from subsistence farming to commercial farming, produce enough for their families and sell on the market, and eventually see a situation where Africa becomes part of the global food security system through exports, we would have made a giant step forward. And we have, and here it's not just governments, but civil society organizations are extremely involved working with farmers. I think the Crown Prince mentioned the experiment in Kenya where you use mobile phone to make payments, which is the M-Pesa system. This M-Pesa has brought about 16 to 18 million people to the financial market. These are people who never would go to a bank, have never been to a bank, and the bank probably wouldn't welcome them. But they use their phones to make payments, to settle bills, and through that, they have been captured into the financial system, expanding it, and this is a system that is spreading very fast on the continent. There are other experiments. We try to set up what we call weather information for all, using the towers of the telecommunication system. The partnership was with Ericsson and other phone companies where we were going to set up weather stations on those antennas to gather weather information which will be available to farmers. And today the weather pattern has changed. The rains don't come when they were supposed to come. I've seen farmers saying, my grandfather told me this, my father told me the rain comes between February and April. This is no longer the case. And we ourselves are trying to give them new seeds which has shorter duration to mature. So the farmers also need the weather information. And hopefully the idea will be to be able to give them access to the information via telephone. And if we did that and also managed to get them insurance, weather index insurance for their crops, not only would they be protected, but they would also be able to raise money from the banks. We're using this new technology for telemedicine, where, as you heard, we use it for births of children. You can also use it for analysis. And there are attempts to set up lab analysis, spreading it around the country, using electronic systems to do it. And of course, long-distance learning for education. And so new technologies can help Africa frog leap some of the processes that other economies had to go through to get to where they are and still remain green. And so the innovation, not only on the ground, but the research that is going on in universities, research centers, in the corporations are extremely important for us all. And we need to take very seriously the need to green the economy. And in fact, some economists would argue that the greening of the economy and the transformation of the way we do business and produce is going to be as important as the Industrial Revolution. And those businessmen and visionary leaders who take the lead are going to get a lot out of this. And I think by doing that and making the inventions also available to the poor, we will be able to do something about our concern with the environment. Because climate change is an all-encompassing threat. It's a threat to our source of clean drinking water, threat to our health as weather gets warmer, diseases like malaria spreads faster, and it is also something that can lead to tensions on scarce resources that societies need. So we need to take that extremely seriously. So let me conclude my opening remarks by saying that I think it is extremely important that we understand that the types of problems we are facing today cannot be tackled by governments or private sector or civil society alone, and that we need to work together to tackle them. Yes, governments have their responsibility. which they cannot shirk. Governments have to come up with the right regulatory environment to allow private sector to get on with this work. Right environment to release the energy and the creativity of their own people. And when I talk of the right environment, I'm not talking only of financial and economic rules. I think we have a tendency when we are assessing the health of nation, what is a healthy democratic nation, we tend to focus sometimes too much on stability, peace and stability, and on economic development and growth. We often forget the third pillar, which is equally important, perhaps even more important, respect for rule of law and human rights. Because if you do not build society on those three pillars, development, security, and rule of law and human rights, you have a wobbly. And we've seen it. How many of us in this room, if anybody had asked in October or November last year to comment on Tunisia, I think the reactions have been, it's a great country, I've been there for holidays, it's beautiful beaches, it's safe, you are under no threat, everything runs well. Forgetting that, yes, it was stable, economically they were doing reasonable, but it was built on sand. If you don't have rules and respect for human rights, any major thing can knock you off. And this is what we have seen. And so I think we need to really do whatever we can to encourage societies built on those three pillars. I will pause here and we'll have a chance to have a conversation. Thank you very much.